Started then, and we'll welcome folks as they come. I appreciate you all being here. My colleague Katharine Montemurri is joining us today as well. Katharine is in the second year of her Master of Divinity program at St. John's School of Theology, and she's working in campus ministry, doing faith formation and calling programming. We collaborate on a couple programs, including this Trails Young Adult Retreat. So it's good to have you with us, Katharine.
So, glad to meet you all.
Yeah, absolutely. So today's Zoom, we'll be talking through this young adult retreat for young adults that Katharine and I developed. And just to set kind of the context for where this fits into the Communities of Calling initiative this spring, we're focusing a lot, as you've noticed, on resource development. So now that you all are in the thick of your work with congregations, and your congregational communities have a baseline understanding, right, of calling and discernment. We've heard requests from many of you to develop more easily accessible, targeted resources that can be used with particular groups that you're ministering to or hope to minister to. And so that's where in February, Ellie Rocher's resources for teenagers and to use during the Easter season came about. Today, again, the focus on college students or more broadly young adults. And then in April, we'll be having Dorothy Bass and Mark Schwain talk through another small group resource that they created around their book, Leading Lives That Matter. And we'll just say too that as we're putting these resources out there, we know that you all are well into your projects and other demands of congregational ministry. And so we're not expecting you to necessarily use these resources right away. You're certainly welcome to, but just know that they'll be available on the website and things down the road. So hopefully at some point you may be able to pick them up, implement without too much trouble. So our goals for today, in about 45 minutes or an hour or so, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the themes and trends that we've been seeing when it comes to young adults and calling. These are some realities that Katharine and I had in mind when we developed the Trails Retreat. So it really comes from a place of listening to the young adults in our community. And I'll say when I'm speaking of young adults, it's kind of a big umbrella term, right? Or it can be. Most of my research focuses on millennials in particular. So this is the group that's now between the ages of about 25 and 40. So on the older side of the young adult spectrum, older members of Generation Z who are now college age would also be in the young adult category. And then after that, we'll have Katharine will walk through this Trails Retreat in particular, share some of the activities, discuss what it was like to engage young adults in this type of retreat experience. And then we'll have plenty of time for some conversations or questions. I imagine you all have been doing some things or know young adults, so there are lots of ways to engage folks. So we'll have some good time for conversation towards the end. So I want to invite Katharine to open us with just a little prayer.
I'm going to use a prayer from this book. We're not sure we'll see this, the To Bless Our Callings, which some of you might be familiar with, coming from Laura Kelly Fanucci and the Institute. And this is titled A Communal Prayer for Discernment. Each of us makes our life decisions. Each of us chooses a path to follow, a value to live by, another to love. Each of us chooses and is chosen. Each of us both takes a path and is shown a path. For some of us, the choice lies ahead. For others, it is long since made. Others, again, are wrestling with deciding. Others are reviewing and choosing again. In quiet prayer, we place our commitments before you, Lord, you who have committed yourself completely to us. We pray to the God of promise and expectation to bless our commitments, whatever point they are at. whether we are assured or struggling, surviving or rejoicing, or still exploring. And we pray. God, our Creator, in Jesus Christ, you have bound yourself to humanity in a bond that cannot be broken. From earliest times, your people called you rock and stronghold and mighty fortress, as they came to appreciate your absolute loyalty and utter dependability. In Jesus' heart of love, you have given the world the enduring statement that you are everlasting, faithful love. In all the power of who you are, bless each one here on the journey of commitment. Bless each one with the gifts that will enhance their joy on the journey. The gift of listening, the gift of putting others first, the gift of self-knowledge, the gift of reliability and faithfulness, the gift of energy, the gift of reflection. As you bless us, may each of us experience in our hearts and in our lives, even a shadow or a hint of the unspeakable, incomparable mystery of love that you are. As you bless us, we bless you for all that you mean to us. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, Catherine. And welcome, Jane. Good to see you. So to get started, so that we can introduce everyone to Catherine and to show you one of our opening activities from Trails, we're going to, I'm going to invite you to click on this link in the chat. It is to a Google Jamboard is what it's called. And what I'd ask is if you can copy and paste it into, it works best in the Google Chrome browser if you have that. We'll try this out, see if it works. This is one platform, a free online platform that we used in our retreat as a way to check in with and make things a little bit more interactive, right? If you're doing virtual retreats, which hopefully we won't have to do for too much longer, but it's also a good option to do, especially for young adults that may be more on the move or in different parts of your community. So we found that using something like this Jamboard, again, can just make things a little more interactive. So was everyone able to get on this link? Are you seeing the map here? Is that showing up?
I'm still working on it.
Okay. Catherine, do you want to just share a little bit where you found this or how you built this page? Was it pretty simple to do?
Yes, very simple. I actually, a professor used it in the fall semester, and she kind of used it almost as a communal whiteboard that we could all add ideas to from our individual homes that we were at. And so for this, originally when we were going to have this retreat in person, the thought was to actually use a physical map. And so we said, we kind of liked that activity, but how do we turn it into a virtual platform? And so I just found a picture of a map on Google Images and posted it in here. And then we'll kind of show you how to add to it and use that whiteboard feature. But very, very simple. I am not a technology person, so I promise you this is not a terribly high bar for learners.
A little something, great. Okay, does everyone see this now? This link, okay. So what I'll invite you to do is the third button from the bottom. So on the left-hand side, you'll see this, there's like little pen and some different emojis. The third one from the bottom is a circle. And if you click on that circle, you can then draw a circle somewhere on the map. So you may have just seen, oops, I just put a circle by the little car. And so what we did on the retreat and what I'd invite you to do is either add a circle or just say aloud where you find yourself on the journey, on your own vocational journey these days. and just a little bit of why. So like for me, I can start. I am going to put my circle down here, right by this bridge. It's been somewhat of a challenging time for my family as my grandma is nearing her death. And so it's feeling like we're vocationally at this crossing where soon she'll be crossing over and our family will go through this transition. And so, yeah, I'm finding myself at this point on the trail. Would someone like to go next and either put a circle or just verbally say out loud where you find yourself on the map, and maybe share where you're calling from too, for Katharine's sake? Oh, I see it. Oh, there's one moving around. Look at this. So Tom, where are you on this map?
Correct me if I'm looking at a mountain or a hill or coming down into a valley before a camping site.
Yeah, yep.
Okay. So vocation journey, faith journey. I think that's where I am, somewhere between coming off that mountain before camping. And now I'm discerning why I put it there. But that's how do you go beyond just describing that's where you think you are? It's there's probably a bit to that, and we actually get into our stories.
Yeah, that's hugely important in discernment. Yeah. And Tom, where are you calling from?
Katharine, I'm from Spokane, Washington.
Wonderful. Good to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Marcia, what about you? Where do you find yourself?
Yeah, I put myself over here right before crossing the last bridge towards the X. And it's kind of where I feel, and I don't know if it's been COVID time or whatever, but I've spent a career in youth ministry and ministry with young adults and church work, and also in my nonprofit. And I'm just feeling kind of after the last year, it's hard to get up onto that bridge, but I think I'm heading towards a different path. I'm not quite ready to go yet, but I just have spent a lot of time discerning, my work at this time and whether I have the energy at this time to go forward in the way that I've always been. And so, I'm just kind of, and, I'm getting towards retirement age, and I'm thinking, well, maybe there's a natural way to gracefully let this go, but I'm not quite there yet, but
Yeah, sure. Excellent. Thanks. And Marcia's in Michigan.
yeah.
Marcia?
Father Mike, where are you finding yourself?
Well, first of all, I'm moving in the opposite direction.
Mhm.
I thought the X was the start and the flag was the finish. So my my direction really doesn't have anything to do with it. I'm in the tent.
You're in the tent.
Just with everything that's gone on in the last year, with kind of running in place, if even that, it's difficult at the moment to imagine what's coming, what's capable of coming next. We were just embarking upon a considered deliberation about ministry with young adults when this all blew up and everything shut down.
Okay.
So from that standpoint, I'm taking a nap. Hopefully getting ready to wake up pretty soon and move ahead. But that's kind of where I am, standing in place. And I'm calling from Eden Prairie, Minnesota.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Carol, how about you? Oh, Carol, you're on mute.
I did what Father Mike did. I did the opposite direction, I guess, but So I parked as though that tent was just before you got to the end. And I'm kind of hovering over the tent, like trying to decide if it's, I had just been working on material for small group tonight. And the question was, are you in a fallow season, or are you in a extend your work season? Are you time to rest? And I don't know the answer. So I'm just hovering over the tent, trying to decide if it's like the last stop or it's time to go or whatever. And I'm calling from Brooklyn, New York.
Thanks. Jane.
Hi, Catherine. I put myself by the car because I'm making some changes in not this part of my vocation, but another part of my vocation. I feel like I'm like packing the car. I actually really hate to pack the car. I don't like all the details. I don't like making sure we've got everything for the journey. And that's where I am.
Excellent, thanks.
Really glad to meet you.
And Catherine, where are you finding yourself?
I put myself kind of right at the base of the mountain, as I'm on the maybe front end of my both professional and ministerial journey. I kind of feel like I'm surveying the bottom of the mountain. I see it there, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to start climbing it. But I'm kind of walking around it, trying to see what the best path up might be, and what obstacles might be there along the way. But also excited about the journey ahead to see what might be there. So I am early in my journey, I think. And I'm calling from Collegeville, so that's where I am right now.
Excellent. Well, thanks. This Jamboard is free. It can be as simple to use as you want it to be, but just know it can be a helpful resource for engaging with young adults if you're doing some kind of a retreat or a small group. And you can see how easy it is for folks to jump in and start talking metaphorically, right? So we picked the metaphor of trails in thinking about the young adults at St. John's and St. Ben's in particular, because it's such an outdoorsy campus. Students are constantly doing outdoor activities. And so the trail metaphor was natural for them. And I think it's a pretty common one for most of us. But if you're working with young adults, there may be another metaphor that you would want to use. And so just know that this is one resource or way of engaging folks.
So Jessie or Catherine, is there a distinction between the X and the flag? Are some of us moving backwards?
I think the whole point of this is it's open to interpretation, right?
Good.
And, wherever you think you are. We did this in person one time just a couple of weeks ago, and we drew this out on a big piece of butcher block. And I purposely actually took out the pathway on that one, just to say, where do you find yourself? But I think it's very much open to interpretation. We often have a lot of students who find themselves in that forest. They're like, I'm in the woods. I don't know which way is up. and this is where I'm at. So I'd say, let the image speak to you as it does.
Totally off the trail. Excellent. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and just as we talk a little bit more about young adults and callings, and just to set some of this context, in the work that I've done with young adults, and particularly as we explore questions of calling and practice of discernment, there's been 3 insights that have stood out to me. And those are the young adults tend to have this desire to breathe, a desire to belong, and a desire to better themselves and the world. So we'll just briefly talk through each of these 3 to set some of the context for thinking about this stage of life and vocation. So first off, in thinking about this desire to breathe, a desire that is not unique to young adults, but I think of a friend of mine, Katie, who's a program associate for a postgraduate volunteer program in Oregon. And Katie is perpetually busy. She's moving from meeting to interview to community time. And in all the years I've known her, she's taken once or twice a year, she takes time to go into the mountains of Oregon for a quiet weekend retreat. And she so looks forward to that time. And I think about other young adults who, like Katie, are just longing for time to rest from the busyness and stress of everyday life. Again, like many of us, I'm sure. Study from the Pew Foundation found that more millennials reported making personal improvement commitments than any generation before them. So in general, young adults are trying to take care of themselves and not run completely thin. Recruiting firms actually are finding that a healthy work-life balance is the #1 reason why people look for a new job, why young people in particular look for new work. So in this culture that demands that we go, go, go and keep producing and keep pushing, many young adults are seeing a need for intentional rest time. Now, what hinders this for, again, many of us is the busyness and the stress of everyday life. We have a lot going on and always have. This is a highly scheduled generation of folks. So growing up, millennials report having less free time alone, more snoopy parents, and more demanding teachers, homework, and scheduled activities. Right? So trends tend to be staying the same as millennials are entering the workforce. Career Builder found that 44% of people aged 25 to 34 have at least one side gig, some side job, which is by far the highest of any age bracket. So young adults from the time we were in grade school, high school, there was a lot going on, a lot being scheduled, and that's continued into young adulthood. And there's also a stress about what the future holds, right? For more on that, I'd direct you to, maybe it doesn't have the greatest title, but this very well-researched Huffington Post article entitled FML, Why Millennials Are Facing the Scariest Financial Future of Any Generation Since the Great Depression. So when we think about young adults and this desire for rest, coupled with the need to be potentially working multiple jobs, being quite busy and scheduled, right? That can, those needs don't always align. And so this is where I think congregations can offer space for young adults to rest. It can be as simple as as opening up your space, right? A simple afternoon retreat. But just having that space to breathe and to step away from daily life is something that young adults today are really yearning for. A second desire that we've seen is this desire to belong. And here I'm thinking about a classmate, Laura, who's a 28-year-old hospital chaplain, and she volunteered for a year after college with the Colorado Vincentian Volunteers before starting a graduate degree. And during her time, her 3 years in graduate school, Laura lived in 3 different intentional living communities. And she continually talks about longing to find a community of peers to spend her time with now that she's moved home with her dad, which is more and more common among young adults these days. And Laura's situation here is definitely not unique among people her age. Many young adults are either in school or are not too far removed from a school setting in which they're surrounded by their peers all the time, right? Growing up, we live and breathe community in the classroom, on sports teams, band, theater, in family homes around the neighborhood. I mean, you name it. And there are places for young teenagers and younger adults to gather. In their book, Millennial Rising, Neil Howe and William Strauss write about the team orientation of millennials in particular. And part of this comes from trends in education that are moving millennials into a more collaborative learning. Right? Group projects are really big for this generation and this time in school. And interestingly, a survey had asked millennials when they were teenagers, what are the major causes of problems in society today? And the number one answer given was selfishness and not thinking about the needs of others. So as a generation, again, this is generally, we tend to be very community minded. And this can be difficult to live into community and to find a sense of belonging in young adulthood because it also tends to be a transient time of life. So the community structures that we're familiar with dissolve when we graduate and finish school, or when we're out of our family homes. I think it's part of the reason why years of service or spending time right after graduation in an intentional living community are becoming more popular. It gives some more time to live intentionally and cultivate that community. And after school ends, work becomes a more significant place to form some type of community. But of course, being a coworker is a different kind of relationship than being a roommate or a friend. Plus, the average job tenure for workers aged 25 to 34 is 3 years, 3 years in a company. So, and this statistic has stayed pretty steady over the last couple decades, but it's still significant, right? That young people explore. It tends to be this time of trying on new identities when it comes to our callings. And sometimes this is by choice, but also many young people today are facing issues of unemployment or underemployment that can also lead to changes in living situations or community life. And once again, I think this is where congregations can, through different initiatives, different offerings, can invite young people into a space where they can belong and can create space for them to be part of the community. And that's a need that young adults have been expressing for a while. And then lastly, this desire that young people express to better themselves and to better the world has been really lovely to see. And I think that's one of the exciting parts of ministering on a college campus, is seeing these students are trying on different identities, and it's for their own sake, but also for the sake of the world. They want to be able to give and contribute to society in a larger way. And one way that this happens is through various forms of mentorship. Mentorship being a really crucial aspect of vocational growth. And in thinking about this, I think of a young man, Peter, who's a recent college graduate. And this past June, he started his first full-time job, right? Big deal, with an engineering firm. And when I asked him how his new job was going about a month in, Peter just glowed about this 40-something-year-old coworker who took him under his wings, and he said, help me learn the company equipment, and even invited me to play Frisbee golf some days after work. All right, so he found this mentor who took an interest in him and wanted to be sure that he was successful in this first job. Matt Bloom from the University of Notre Dame talks about exemplars or mentors being real salient models of individuals who appear to be living their calling in and through their work, and how invaluable they are for young adults like Peter, like many of us who are still searching for our identities. The mentor or an exemplar acts as a point of comparison. So Peter might say, I noticed Bob's always getting his projects done on time, and I know I need to now work on my organizational skills so that I can do the same thing. In general, we're finding young adults really want that mentorship too. And in addition to work, there are many other examples of mentor relationships that could fall more into the congregational setting, things like spiritual directors, right? And things like that. So in addition, though, to valuing mentors, young adults also want to be mentors themselves. There was this fascinating article in the New York Times a few years back about a trend called reverse mentoring, in which millennial workers were training older workers, often in areas of technology or cultural relevancy. Millennials in general are known as a confident generation who not only have something to learn as mentees, but also have something to give as mentors. And I think, what better space than in the congregation where there is this intergenerational aspect where the wisdom of older folks and the wisdom of younger folks can really be meshed together, and they can learn from one another. So yeah, again, these are three desires that we've seen, these desires to breathe, to belong, and to better themselves and the world, that many young adults are carrying in and around your congregations. And I'm curious, before Katharine gets into how these play out in the Trails Retreat in particular, I'm curious how this lands with you. If these are desires that you're seeing in the young adults in your congregation, if there are other desires that, when we think about vocation and calling, have really risen to the forefront. Yeah, we'll pause for a minute. What are you seeing?
Do you find that churches sometimes, it's interesting, as you said, churches could make a place for rest for young adults. And I know a lot of times churches see young adults as a source of energy for the church. How do you approach that, knowing that that's kind of a temptation for churches to maybe over enlist or overburden young adults?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an important tension that you're naming, Carol, because oftentimes young people just naturally can come in with a good amount of energy, but that energy is not going to be sustainable if there's not time for rest. I mean, the number of young people that I encounter who you just see the big rings around their eyes, the exhaustion, that they're running on low fumes. And so I could see it, what would it look like for a congregation to, maybe you're inviting your young adults to serve in like a greeter ministry or some other particular ministry, but then to after that invitation to also include an invitation for a Sabbath day, right? Or a small group where they're not expected to give anything or be called upon, but it's really time for them. I think maybe being able to balance offering both to them, and maybe trying to keep expectations too at in a fair amount, that if many young adults that we work with feel very pressured to say yes to things. And so I've always tried to make it be very explicit that this is an invitation for you. We see these particular gifts. I think you'd be great in this ministry. And if you don't have time, it's okay to say that. It's okay to say no. That's a big learning point for probably many of us vocationally, right? But for young adults in particular, they don't always know that they can say no, that they have some ownership over their time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious when in the nature of this discussion so far, I'm tending to assume that by millennials we're referring overwhelmingly to singles. That may be wrong. And I would also add, just as an observation, and I'd welcome your response. Ours is, as you know, Jessie, ours is an enormous congregation, thousands and thousands of people, and the millennials aren't there. Some of them will last through college, maybe, and then there's this 15-year break when they come back as parents of young children. But I can count on a couple of hands the number of engaged millennials at Pax Christi. And I just invite anyone with wisdom to respond to that, because I'm at a loss to figure out how to engage that.
Yeah. Are others finding things similar in your parishes? Oh, Tom, I think you're on mute.
I would say similar, Jessie, to Father Mike and Catherine. I think what we struggle with, Father, is why. Has the research really come to a conclusion, Jessie, Catherine, as to why what Father Mike just explains is the case? And if we identify that why, we've made a first step toward maybe looking at what we're talking about and trying to address this. So what is the research showing as to that answer?
Yeah, it's big and complex, Tom. I think to your and Father Mike's point, a few issues that I've seen. One has to do, frankly, with the credibility of churches these days. And I'm thinking church in its broadest sense, in various denominations who may be facing things like the abuse crisis, financial issues, whatever it may be, these issues that have put their credibility into question. And I think perhaps more than generations in the past, young adults today are not willing to give free passes, right? There's authority isn't something that just can be taken for granted, I think. And so, and that's a big issue in churches, but that's a reason that I've heard from many young adults that they just don't see the church as a credible more. And so that's tough. I don't know what we can do about that on an individual level. But on a more local level, I think when young adults when there are so many different opportunities to use their time in various ways, how do you make the church stand out? And is there a way that the church can go out to meet young adults where they are? If young adults aren't able to get to Mass on Sunday because they have a small group homework assignment that they're working on that day, right? Or a sports event, or these things that we know shouldn't maybe rise above church, but the reality is they do at times. Are there other ways that we don't have to expect the young adults to come into church, but the church can go out and meet them where they are? That's a question I often think about.
Maybe I could piggyback on that.
Please.
Any idea where they are?
Where they are on Sunday mornings, or just in general?
In general.
In general. Catherine, you unmuted. What do you think?
Yeah, one of the things that I might roundabout respond to that question directly, Father Mike, but kind of just thinking of that reverse mentoring that Jessie mentioned, along with this maybe struggle with authority on a kind of existential level, I think there's this desire of young people to be appreciated for the wisdom that they do have at their age. And frequently there is this response that young people get that's like, well, you haven't lived enough yet. You don't know enough, or your gifts are underdeveloped yet. And so right now you're just that energy, or you're just that youth. And, when I look around at the world right now, young adults are at the front lines of change in our communities and really taking some just risks with the ways that they're spending their time. And so what I think it can be a number of responses to where those young adults are, but I think they are looking for meaning, and they're trying to find places that align with their values. And if right now that's not a church for various reasons that Jessie maybe mentioned, maybe they're seeing that in a social movement, and so they're putting their energies and their passions toward the promise of a better future. Or maybe they have, they've started their own initiative about something that they're passionate about, and they're with their peers on that. But I do think there in some of those initiatives, there is this loss of that intergenerational gift that faith communities can offer. And so I really see that as a place of growth for our congregations, is to be able to say, like, at any age, at any stage, we all have gifts to give and we can learn from one another. And how can we demonstrate that value and say, we need you here, not just because you're young, but because you have something to teach us about God, and vice versa. So that's a little bit of what I see.
As you're speaking, I'm thinking this is pretty intense here in the Twin Cities, but where I see millenniums right now is at the protest lines at the George Floyd trial, where it's almost all millennials, at least the ones that get on the camera, which suggests to me a real need for faith communities to engage the issues of justice, especially racial justice. And I don't know exactly how that happens. I mean, you can preach about it and catechize about it, but that's kind of boring. So it's a start.
Yeah, that's a great observation, Father Mike. I see that too, that millennials are, some may say that they're living out their gospel values on the front lines of Black Lives Matter marches or other social movements that I've heard many connect directly to their faith. This is what it means for me to live out the gospel, and this is where I'm going to show up. And so, yeah, there are even little ways that churches can make that connection. That could be valuable.
Embracing the prophetic nature of their baptismal call, that element of their calling. And I think young people are really saying, yeah, we're looking for prophets. And if we're not finding them, we're going to try and use that prophetic voice that we have.
These are great. Thank you. I want to be sure we have just a little time for Katharine to talk through this Trails retreat itself. And then let's definitely, with whatever time left, continue to engage your questions, because these, there's so much to talk about when it comes to young adults and connecting to the church. But Katharine, I'll share a PowerPoint again if you want to talk this through.
Yeah, so we'll just take a few minutes here to walk through a little bit of this particular resource that Jessie and I have developed over the last year and a half or so, and how this Trails retreat came to be. So beginning in the fall of 2019, which was when I started here at St. John's, I kind of spent some time with the help of Jessie and the rest of the campus ministry staff, having some interviews with students and just listening to them and saying, what do you understand? How do you hear these words, vocation and calling? How do these show up in your life? And really, after gathering that input, Jessie and I decided that, there's a lot of students, especially on this campus, and this is the 18 to 21-year-old range for the most part, who, some have some developed understanding of calling, but others are really still making that pretty straight line to state of life, or specifically vocation to ordination in some form, or religious life, or career. They're really seeing that calling is all about what I'm going to be when I grow up. They're in a place on a college campus where they're very future oriented, and that's the questions that they're being asked almost all the time. So our goal here was to expand that language a bit, not say it's not those things, but to say yes, and it is these things plus many of the other ways that we experience calling in our lives. And so we decided to go with storytelling, and specifically Kathleen Cahalan's preposition kind of framework around vocation, because it felt really accessible, effective, and engaging for students to start to say, whoa, here are some things that I've actually lived, and this is how I'm starting to make those connections between my story, God's story, the story of the community, all of those things together. And so we use this definition that's at the bottom of the screen there as kind of our our foundational place for this retreat. Vocation as the journey of being called by God as I am through my relationships in order to be of service to the world. And we can, head to this next slide. So a little bit of what we tried here. This is an image of one of our Instagram posts. I was saying earlier, I'm not a very tech savvy individual. And so part of this job has been learning to use Instagram, which I'm still not very good at, but we're learning a little bit at a time. But this image shows one of the things that we decided to do when hosting a virtual retreat was we said, what are the things that we would have gathered to be in person with students? And usually that's going to include some snacks, some food, maybe some tangible resources that we'll use for activities and such. And so we created just small little resource kits out of some very basic things. You'll see in that picture, there's a journal, a pen. We put together a little deck of preposition cards with story prompts on them that we used as a big part of the time together. And a little personal note that we hand wrote and just said, hey, we're so excited to be with you for this retreat, and we're praying for you. We're looking forward to the time we're going to share together. And students really enjoyed getting these in the mail. It was this fun little surprise, just especially when they're living away from home for the most part. It was just a joy for them to get something very small and simple, but a little exciting care package of sorts. So we sent that prior to the retreat, and then the retreat itself was split into, generally speaking, kind of 2 75-minute input times. And then knowing that Zoom fatigue is a very real thing that many of us are experiencing right now, we wanted to make sure that there was some time that was not on the screen. So in the middle, we had about 45 minutes where students had some solo time, but it was guided. They had a task at hand that they were going to reflect on their personal experiences. So on the right side there, you just see a little breakdown of the way we structured time a bit. And so the whole retreat was about close to 4 hours in time. The first part, then I'll just dive into very briefly here. This first session was really about kind of setting a tone and building trust with the group. The groups remained fairly small. We think the largest group that we've had so far was maybe 15 students. And some of them knew one another and some did not. And I think many of us can attest that when we have programming, you need to build trust before you can start sharing vulnerably of yourselves. And doing that virtually has different challenges. And so doing what we can to introduce one another using that activity, that Jamboard that you all got to use earlier. Doing things like lighting a candle and making that known of we're setting holy space, even though we're on screens together. And paying attention to our bodies, calling our bodies present to this experience together, knowing that again, on screens, it's a lot of, I'm using this top part of my of my being, but not my whole self. So setting that tone. And then really trying to lay out this metaphor for folks. Jessie mentioned how trails are an important part of, I would say, the spirituality at St. Ben's and St. John's, and how it can be a really apt way to think about the work that we do when we are discerning and listening for God together. The big part of this, again, when we're talking specifically about storytelling as our maybe discernment tool at hand, this was a little bit new for some folks, but the goal was to say, let's look back at some of these experiences that you've had, especially when you're in this environment that's very future oriented. Let's look backwards a little bit and see what's happened and what's gotten you to the place that you are today. And that's where those prepositions came in. So we kind of created these cards that were with the help of the Cultural Institute that just had a little prompt on the back of each one. So it said, this one says, share a story of a time when you were called towards something you enjoy or you love. Or share a story of a time when you were called in a time of grief and suffering and loss. And even just these prompts start to open that language for these students to say that, oh, I could have experienced calling when there was suffering in my life, or when there was this very ordinary encounter that I had with somebody in my life. And so with that time, the hope was they could pull out one moment on their journey, and we could talk about that specifically, which led us into the second session. And here, what we did is, this was the kind of the main event of the retreat itself. We made I'd say an adapted kind of theological reflection type of process with these students and encouraged them to tell stories in a new way. So what this, for the most part, looked like was each student had about 2 to 3 minutes to share about the story that they had developed in their solo time. And the rest of their small group just listened and really listened compassionately to what was being offered by their peer. After that had happened, they took a little bit of silence, just a moment to kind of ruminate in what they had heard, what they had experienced. And then we used these 3 guiding questions, or there's maybe 4 in there, but these few guiding questions to open up some reflection. And they were, what did I notice in the story or in the storyteller? How did I sense God showing up in the story? And would Jesus know or be familiar with this story? Are there other stories in scripture or other sacred texts that connect with this story that we're hearing? And the goal of this, which was very different for our students, was they weren't just off the cuff responding to what they heard from their peers. They were really taking this in prayerfully, and they weren't trying to fix or to give advice to what they heard. They were really trying to receive as gift and do some communal listening and say, wow, I'm really seeing God show up in your story as, a friend, or I'm seeing God show up in your story as, a bicycle, because it's helping, God's helping you get from one place to the other. And then with the stories of saying, what are the other stories around us, especially in our faith traditions, that can help us connect to the bigger picture? So this took about 45 minutes to an hour, depending on the group. And I think what was beautiful about this experience was that it was transformative, not only to tell your story, but also to listen to the stories of others and to reflect on those together. So that was kind of the main event there. I think for time, Jessie, should we probably forego our second activity?
Yeah, I think so. I could just share the screen really briefly just to show you another use of this Jamboard.
And if you go to the 3rd page, I think you can see one of the filled out Jamboards. So yes, another use of this Jamboard. After folks told stories, we kind of transitioned into, okay, so storytelling, this was one tool that we could use. What are some other tools that you have when you're discerning? And the goal here was to say, you have more wisdom or more tools in your backpack than you realize. And so on this Jamboard, people can put these little Post-it notes on and type in a response to what helps you on your discernment journey. You can see, Jessie putting one there. And the hope is that none of us is as wise as all of us. And we can glean some ideas from one another. And so they could take 1 or 2, 3 of these ideas, put them in their backpack and carry them forward onto the next part of the journey. So that was another fun little activity to use. From there, the very last thing that we did was a closing blessing, which I also think was a beautiful way to ritualize their experience together. While folks had, after each individual had told their story and the reflection had happened, we invited all of the retreatants to write down a word or a phrase of something that they noticed in whoever the storyteller was, a gift, something that they noticed in them. And in their closing blessing, we blessed each participant, and there was a part in the blessing that said, and today we notice in Jessie, And then their peers could list off these gifts that they're seeing in one another. And then Jessie and I captured those. We caught a list of those. And then we were able to send that personalized blessing to the retreatants about a month later with a, hey, how's it going? We're checking in. Here's a small reminder of the giftedness that you have as you continue your discernment journey, as you continue to respond to the callings in your life. So that really was all that we could capture in a 4-hour period of time. But I think it was profound, and you can kind of see some of what we learned here through that experience. First, we just learned that students really enjoyed sharing and listening to stories and doing it in a very unique way. They're not used to telling a story to someone and being uninterrupted, or knowing that the person that I just spoke to, their goal is not to give me advice. It's just to listen, to receive me, to receive all that I am, and to do so gently. We also learned, though, that this was new. It was very new, especially for our sophomore students who were on the second retreat that we hosted. They had a little bit of trouble. They weren't used to telling stories about themselves. A few of them told stories about dad or grandma, and we had to kind of, and that was just one of those aha moments, oh, they're not used to being the protagonist in their story quite yet. And so it let us know that we needed to be a facilitator to help redirect when we were starting to get off the path a little bit here. But that was really valuable for us. We got to use some new ministry tools and see the benefits and limitations of those in technology. One of the fun things that I think we did, we created a little Spotify playlist. And if any of you have used that, creates a playlist of music that we said, okay, on your solo time, put this on in the background, and that will help you keep a retreated environment. That was another little idea that we had, but I think Ben created a retreat-like experience for them. And then just this final little statement, this was some feedback from a student that was on our most recent retreat. And he just said, I was reminded of the power that comes in authentic conversation with others. Discerning a path is tough and sometimes scary, but knowing that we're not alone is so helpful. I also learned how important it is to ask big questions and not be afraid of what you find. Some of the best things in life are difficult, but looking back, it is worth it and then some. And I just thought that was such a good summary of where these students are right now and how they're experiencing this, and that feeling of, okay, I belonged. There was a sense of belonging here, like Jessie mentioned. There are others who are doing this too. There is this sense of, I have a future and it's okay, and we're going to get there, and God is with me ultimately. So that's the kind of quick overview of what that Trails retreat looked like. And I'm not sure what we have time-wise here, but Jessie, I'll pass it back to you on this.
Yeah. Thanks, Katharine. Yeah, it's 2:00, so we'll wrap up. And what I'm realizing just in this conversation and the questions that you all offered is, what we have here is a resource for young adults that was created in a college situation in which young adults are plentiful, right? So there's another, though, question that I'm hearing is, like, how do we get young adults here in the first place, or how do we engage young adults in our community? And maybe that's something that Jane, we could find time in the coming weeks to have another conversation about that, because a resource can be really great and wonderful, but if the young adults aren't there or in relationship with the community already, there's no one there to be on retreat, right? So let's table that for another time. In the meantime, though, I will send out the link to this website where we put all the materials for the retreat on. So you can click and find an overview of the retreat, the schedule, things like Katharine talked through, the different blessings, tips for the trail, all of that. So the hope is that you could go to this website and be able to host this retreat or take it and make it your own in a way that would be helpful. So I'll be sure to send that out to you all. But with that, I want to be respectful of your time, so we'll wrap up. But I appreciate your presence here and what you are doing for young adults and your interest in young adults, period. That's not always the case for everyone. So thanks for, yeah, your investment in that ministry, and we'll continue this conversation going forward.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
For letting me join you all. This was fun.
Oh, interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.